They're mad because you never called them again. They're angry, offended, and confused because your silence spoke louder than your words ever could. They can't understand why the one who once tolerated their drama, their manipulation, their inconsistency suddenly walked away without explanation. But let me tell you something today. It was not weakness that made you walk away. It was strength. It was growth. It was divine separation orchestrated by God Himself. Sometimes God will silence your mouth so that He can speak through your absence. Sometimes God will pull you out of certain circles, not because you hate anyone, but because He is protecting your peace, your destiny, and your spiritual growth. You didn't stop calling them because you were proud. You stopped calling because you finally listened to God. You finally realized that peace is more valuable than fake connections. You finally understood that loyalty to God is greater than loyalty to confusion. There are moments in life when God will lead you away from people who once felt essential to your story. You'll wake up one day and feel no desire to reach out, no burden to explain yourself, no need to argue your value. That's not coldness, that's clarity. That's what it feels like when your spirit matures. God doesn't want you chasing after relationships that drain your energy, diminish your worth, and distract you from your purpose. Some people were only supposed to be in one chapter of your story, but you tried to make them part of your whole book. They're mad because they can't control you anymore. They're mad because you're not responding to the same bait, not falling for the same emotional traps, not feeding the same ego that once fed off your attention. They're mad because God healed you. God freed you, God gave you peace that no apology could ever bring. And now your silence is shouting that you've changed, that you've grown, that you no longer dance to the tune of manipulation. My friend, when God begins to elevate you, He also begins to isolate you. You will start to see people's true intentions when you stop giving them constant access to you. Not everyone who once stood beside you was standing with you. Some stood near you because your light was feeding their darkness. But when you started protecting your light, they started calling you distant, arrogant, or selfish. They'll twist your growth into pride, your boundaries into betrayal, your peace into rejection. But don't you dare let their opinions pull you back into their chaos. You owe no one an explanation for choosing peace over poison. You owe no apology for refusing to be mistreated. God didn't call you to keep resurrecting relationships that He Himself buried. Some people are angry because you obeyed God when He told you enough. You can't keep calling what God has ended. You can't keep reopening doors that God has locked for your protection. Your silence is not cruelty, it's obedience. There's a reason your spirit grew quiet. There's a reason you lost the desire to chase people who never appreciated you. God is teaching you the sacred art of separation, not from hatred, but from wisdom. You learned that love doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. You learned that forgiveness doesn't mean foolishness. You learned that peace sometimes looks like distance. And that lesson came from God. They can talk, they can mock, they can accuse, but they can't undo what God is already healed. You see, there are people who liked you better when you were broken. They preferred you when you doubted yourself, when you needed their approval to feel whole. They liked you better when your boundaries were weak and your voice was silent. But the moment you started respecting yourself, the moment you stopped answering every call and entertaining every argument, you became a problem to them. They're not mad because you stopped calling. They're mad because they lost control. They're mad because your silence revealed who they truly were. When you stop reaching out, the truth starts speaking. You start seeing who was genuine and who was just convenient. God allowed that distance not to hurt you, but to heal you. Because peace is never found in constant chaos. God will sometimes use silence as His weapon of revelation. He will quiet your soul, pull you back, and make you watch how people behave when they no longer have your presence. And you'll start seeing it clearly, who respected you and who used you, who loved you and who loved what you gave. That's why your absence is so loud, because it exposes what your presence used to cover. You were the one who always reached out. You were the one who always fixed things. You were the one who said, "Let's talk," when they didn't deserve your words. And God saw that. God saw how you poured into people who never poured back. He saw how you stayed loyal to people who betrayed you in silence. And finally, God said, "Enough." He said, "Now I will show them that the one they ignored was the one I had blessed." When you stopped calling, you didn't lose anyone who truly loved you. You simply lost the ones who loved the benefit of being close to you. And that's divine pruning. God removes people not to leave you empty, but to make room for those who can walk with you into the next season of your purpose. You can't carry everyone where you're going. Some people were lessons, not life partners. Some relationships were temporary classrooms where your soul learned endurance, wisdom, and strength. They'll gossip about you, they'll call you fake, they'll accuse you of changing. But let them talk, because what they call change, God calls growth. What they call distance, God calls deliverance. What they call silence, God calls strategy. You're not being rude, you're being rebuilt. You're not avoiding people, you're aligning with God. When God wants to bless your life, He often begins by subtraction, not addition. He takes away what's hindering you before giving what's meant for you. And though it may hurt to lose connections that once felt familiar, remember this: peace always costs something. You cannot keep everyone and still keep your calling. You cannot walk in divine purpose and still stay tied to toxic comforts. God had to pull you away so you could finally see what He was preparing for you. You see, silence is not emptiness, it's sacred. It's in silence that God restores your vision. It's in silence that God speaks truth into your heart. When you stopped calling them, you gave God room to call you higher. While they were talking about you, God was talking to you. While they were questioning your loyalty, God was strengthening your character. Don't regret the distance. Don't mourn the absence. Every person who walked out, every call you didn't make, every text you never sent, it all served a divine purpose. God separated you to protect the purity of your journey. You can't become who God destined you to be if you're still trying to explain yourself to those who refuse to understand your transformation. They want you to come back and apologize for setting boundaries. They want you to feel guilty for outgrowing them. But the truth is, you didn't abandon anyone. You simply responded to God's direction. You followed peace. And peace never leads you wrong. When you choose peace, God stands beside you. You owe it to yourself and to the purpose God placed in you to protect your peace. Stop reopening wounds to prove you've healed. Stop calling people who only remember you when they need something. Stop explaining your silence to those who never valued your words. God saw what they said behind your back. God heard the conversations that you weren't invited to. And God said, "My child, step back. I will fight for you." That's why your silence is so powerful, because it's backed by divine defense. You no longer fight with words. You let God handle it. You no longer chase validation. You let God vindicate you. You no longer beg for closure. You let God close the door. That's maturity, not weakness, not arrogance, but divine maturity. There's something sacred about walking away quietly. It confuses the enemy. It disarms gossip. It leaves space for God to work. Sometimes the greatest sermon you'll ever preach is the one you deliver in silence, not through words, but through peace. Let your peace speak louder than your explanation. People may call you heartless, but God knows your heart. He knows the tears you cried before you decided to stop calling. He knows how many nights you felt guilty for letting go. He knows the internal war between wanting to stay loyal and needing to stay sane. God knows, and because He knows, He will bless you for your obedience. Let them be mad. Let them misunderstand. You're not responsible for their version of your story. You're responsible for walking in truth. And the truth is, you have outgrown the old you. You have healed from what once held you hostage. You have matured in silence. You no longer crave attention. You crave alignment. You no longer chase approval. You chase peace. And that's the kind of growth that threatens insecure people. The moment you decided to stop explaining yourself, stop defending your decisions, stop chasing validation, that was the moment your spirit broke free. You stopped calling them, but you started calling on God. And that changed everything. When you talk less to people and more to God, your life begins to shift. He begins to reorder your steps, refine your priorities, and restore your peace. You're not bitter, you're blessed. You're not cold, you're covered. You're not rude, you're redeemed by growth. They can't understand that because they're still living in the noise you left behind. But don't worry, one day they'll see. One day they'll realize that losing access to you was not rejection, it was correction. Keep walking in silence. Keep choosing peace. Keep trusting God's separation. You are not missing out on anything that belongs to you. What's meant for you will always find you, even in silence. And what's not meant for you will fade no matter how many times you call. So let God handle who stays and who leaves. Let God deal with those who misunderstand your silence. Your peace is your proof that you're walking with God. And those who truly belong in your life will respect your growth, not resent it. You see, real love understands distance. Real connection respects silence. But fake loyalty will always demand your attention without earning your trust. There comes a moment when your silence becomes more powerful than your words ever were. That moment when you stop explaining, stop proving, and stop trying to make people see what only God can reveal. It's not pride, it's peace. It's not arrogance, it's awareness. It's that sacred point in life where your discernment sharpens and your spirit refuses to tolerate what no longer aligns with God's purpose for your life. And though people may be mad, confused, or offended that you never called them again, deep down, it's not really about the call. It's about control. They're not angry because you stop speaking. They're angry because your silence means they can no longer manipulate you. They're not upset because they miss your words. They're upset because your absence exposes their intentions. God will often remove you quietly from certain people, not to punish them, but to protect you. You see, not everyone can handle the version of you that's connected to God. Some only knew you in your wounded form, the version that tolerated disrespect, that tried to fix what God already broke apart. But when God heals your mind, you become unrecognizable to those who once benefited from your pain. When you stop calling, you begin to hear God more clearly. You realize that peace isn't found in having more people around you. Peace is found in having more of God within you. The more you grow spiritually, the less noise you need. The more you understand divine purpose, the less approval you crave. God teaches you that silence isn't emptiness, it's alignment. It's in those quiet seasons that He resets your heart, purifies your motives, and restores your identity. They don't know what God whispered to you in those silent moments. They don't understand the tears that watered your transformation. They don't see how many times you almost called, but God stopped you. God said, "No, my child. This time, let me handle it. This time, don't explain. This time, don't go back. This time, trust me." And you obeyed. You let go. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started trusting. That's spiritual maturity. Knowing that silence is sometimes the loudest obedience. There are relationships that die the moment you awaken spiritually. When God opens your eyes, He also exposes the disguises around you. You begin to see who truly walked with you and who only watched you. You begin to see that not everyone who smiled was sincere. Not everyone who called you family meant it. Not everyone who clapped for you wanted you to rise. And that revelation doesn't make you bitter, it makes you wiser. God removes illusions to reveal truth, and truth always requires distance. They're mad because they no longer have access to your peace. They miss the version of you that always picked up the phone, always said yes, always tried to fix what was breaking you. But now you're different. You've learned to pray before you react, to pause before you engage, to seek God before you seek closure. That kind of growth frightens those who still live in emotional chaos. Your peace threatens their dysfunction because your calmness exposes their confusion. You don't have to defend your silence to anyone. God knows your heart, and that's enough. When you walked away, you didn't betray them. You simply honored God's guidance. Some people are not meant to be part of your destiny because they were assigned to your history. And holding on to them becomes disobedience when God is calling you forward. It's painful. Yes, you'll question yourself. You'll miss certain memories. But one day, you'll realize the distance that hurt you also healed you. When God separates you, it's not rejection, it's redirection. It means He has seen conversations you didn't hear, motives you didn't discern, and traps you couldn't see. He knows what's being planned behind closed doors, so He quietly moves you away before the storm hits. And though at first the silence feels strange, later you understand God saved you without needing your permission. That's why you must never apologize for obeying divine instruction. They're mad because you never called them again, but maybe it's because God never told you to. Maybe God wanted you to stop calling, stop chasing, stop proving, and start resting. He wanted you to see that not everyone deserves your energy. He wanted you to discover the power of peace, not the peace that comes from people-pleasing, but the peace that comes from trusting God completely. Let them misinterpret your silence. God interpret your intentions. Let them call you cold. God knows your compassion. Let them label you selfish. God knows the price you paid to protect your spirit. Because the truth is, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to let people go. Sometimes love means letting them feel your absence so they can confront their own behavior. When God teaches you silence, He's also teaching you strength. Because silence isn't weakness, it's discipline. It takes divine strength to not respond when you could, to not argue when you're right, to not explain when you know the truth. That's not weakness, that's mastery. That's walking in divine calm, knowing that God will speak for you in ways your words never could. And when He does, those who misunderstood your silence will witness His vindication. Because when God fights for you, He doesn't do it through noise. He does it through undeniable evidence. He blesses you in front of the very ones who doubted you. He elevates you in the presence of those who tried to silence you. That's why your quietness is dangerous, because it's backed by the power of God's presence. God doesn't need your words to prove your worth. He needs your obedience to prove your faith. And every time you choose peace over argument, prayer over panic, and silence over shouting, you're telling God, I trust you more than I trust my emotions. That's where divine favor flows in the calm heart that waits on God instead of reacting to people. You see, when you stop calling them, you make room for God to call you higher. You leave behind conversations that no longer feed your growth. You stop defending what God has already delivered you from. You begin to understand that not every connection was meant to continue. Some were meant to teach you discernment. Some were meant to show you your own strength. Some were meant to reveal what peace truly feels like when you stop settling for chaos disguised as companionship. They'll talk. They'll twist the story. They'll say, you changed. And they're right. You did change. You changed from a people pleaser to a God listener. You changed from seeking validation to seeking wisdom. You changed from chasing acceptance to chasing purpose. And that transformation will always irritate those who thrive on your weakness. But let them talk. Their noise cannot drown out what God has already declared over your life. Every time you choose to stay silent, heaven applauds. Every time you resist the urge to call back, to argue, to prove, you grow stronger in spirit. You start walking with a calm confidence that can only come from God. Because when you learn that your value doesn't depend on who stays or who leaves, you finally experience freedom. Let the world misunderstand you as long as God understands you. Let them think you've become distant as long as God knows you're becoming disciplined. Because in the end, only one opinion matters, God's. You don't need their approval when you already have divine peace. You don't need to be liked when you're already loved by the one who created you. There will come a day when the same people who were mad that you never called will see your peace, your glow, your elevation, and they'll realize it was never personal. It was spiritual. It wasn't that you hated them, it was that you had outgrown them. You moved from emotional noise to divine stillness. And in that stillness, you found something greater than friendship. You found God's voice. There comes a sacred hour in every person's life when God allows silence to become the teacher. When no one calls, no one checks, no one seems to care, and you sit in that stillness wondering what happened. But deep within you, you feel the hand of God shifting things. That silence isn't punishment, it's preparation. God is removing the noise so you can hear the truth. And sometimes that truth begins with realizing that your peace was never meant to depend on anyone's attention. When you stop calling, you stop chasing validation. You begin to see how much time you once spent trying to prove your worth to people who were never qualified to define it. And that realization is holy because God never told you to beg for love, to plead for respect, or to fight for space in someone's life. He said, "Be still and know that I am God." That means your stillness is not weakness, it is faith. It is the quiet confidence that what God removes, He replaces with something better. They're mad because your silence made them face themselves. When you stopped calling, they could no longer hide behind your forgiveness. They had to look at their own actions, their own words, their own neglect, and that's uncomfortable. Some people are only comfortable when they can keep you apologizing, explaining, and overextending. But when you finally stop, when you finally choose silence over struggle, they lose control. And that's when they start calling you the problem. Don't be surprised when peace offends people who live in chaos. Don't be surprised when your calmness irritates those who thrive on confusion. When God places His peace on your life, your very presence convicts those who refuse to change. That's why they talk about you. That's why they twist your story. But it's not your job to defend yourself. It's your job to keep walking in alignment. Because when you walk with God, He will handle what your words never could. There are seasons where God will let people walk away so you can discover how strong you are when all you have is Him. Those are the seasons that build your backbone. That's when you learn that your worth doesn't shrink just because someone no longer sees it. You learn that love from others can fluctuate, but love from God remains steady. You learn that being alone with God is never loneliness. It's healing. It's a spiritual reset. It's a divine clearing of the clutter that used to confuse your spirit. They may call you distant, but they don't know what God is doing in your quietness. They can't see the sacred construction taking place inside you. God is rebuilding your confidence, teaching you to depend on peace instead of attention. He's teaching you to discern between connections that feed your growth and connections that drain it. He's teaching you that silence isn't the absence of love, it's the presence of boundaries. You see, when you walk with God long enough, you stop chasing explanations. You stop needing closure. You stop arguing over who was right and who was wrong because you realize that peace doesn't come from being understood. Peace comes from being obedient. When God says leave, you leave. When He says be silent, you stay silent. When He says move on, you move on, even if no one claps for you, even if no one understands. Because your loyalty belongs to God, not to the expectations of others. And that's what maturity looks like, when you no longer react to every opinion, when you no longer respond to every message, when you no longer explain what only God can justify. You don't owe anyone an update on your healing. You don't owe anyone a speech about your silence. Let them think what they want. God sees your intention. God knows the purity of your heart. And that's all that matters. They're mad because your silence made them lose the power to provoke you. They were used to seeing you emotional, reactive, desperate to fix things. But now you've learned to walk away with peace instead of pain. You've learned to let God be your defender instead of your tongue. And that kind of restraint shakes people who depend on chaos to feel in control. But don't break your silence to explain your peace. Let your calm be the evidence that God is working. Every time you choose silence over reaction, heaven records it as strength. Every time you hold your tongue when you could destroy someone with truth, God rewards your discipline. Every time you walk away when your pride wants to fight, you're proving that your spirit is led by peace, not by ego. That's what separates the wise from the wounded. The wise let God vindicate, while the wounded try to win arguments. There is a beauty in letting people wonder why you're no longer available. You don't need to tell them that your priorities changed. You don't need to tell them that your spirit evolved. God knows. And when the time is right, your peace will speak louder than your words ever could. Because eventually, silence becomes a sermon. It teaches others how powerful stillness can be. It teaches them that not everyone who disappears is bitter. Some disappear because they finally found what others kept distracting them from: God. They'll say you've grown cold, but they don't understand that your silence is full of prayer. They don't know that you're talking to God in the hours they thought you'd be explaining yourself to them. They don't realize that your isolation is your elevation. You've withdrawn from noise to hear divine instruction. And in that private space, God is revealing what you were too distracted to see. There's a reason God didn't allow you to go back. There's a reason the desire to reconnect faded. God doesn't want you reliving lessons that already matured you. The silence was not an accident. It was an answer. It was God's way of saying, you've outgrown this level. Stop trying to resurrect what I have removed. When God calls you to peace, anything that disturbs that peace becomes an enemy of your destiny. Sometimes, the greatest act of faith is to stay quiet while everything in you wants to speak. To trust that God knows what they said about you. To trust that God saw how they treated you. To trust that you don't need to call anyone to defend yourself because the truth doesn't need a lawyer. It needs time. And when time passes, God always exposes what was hidden. He reveals motives, unveils lies, and restores dignity to the silent. So don't let their anger make you question your obedience. Don't let their gossip make you feel guilty for growing. Don't let their distance tempt you to go back. The same people who misunderstand your silence today will respect your peace tomorrow. The same ones who mock your stillness now will witness your elevation later. Because when God is with you, silence is never the end. It's the turning point. Keep your peace sacred. Don't trade it for validation. Don't let emotional noise pull you back into conversations God already silenced. You don't owe anyone constant access to your heart. Protect what God gave you. Protect your calm, your clarity, your connection with Him. Because once peace enters your life, it becomes your responsibility to guard it fiercely. And remember this, not everyone is meant to understand your silence, but everyone will see the results of it. When you stop calling them, you start hearing God. When you stop chasing them, you start walking with God. And when you stop explaining yourself, you start witnessing what only God can do. So stay still, stay grounded, stay faithful. Because while they are mad that you never called, God is preparing a future that will speak louder than any call you could have made. Your silence is not the end of connection, it's the beginning of divine direction. Let them be angry, let them misunderstand. One day they'll realize you didn't walk away to forget them, you walked away to find God. And that will always be the most powerful reason of all. Sometimes silence is the greatest sermon you'll ever preach. Your absence speaks louder than your words ever could. There are people who only respected you when you needed them, but the moment you stopped calling, the moment you stopped reaching out, they realized that you were not weak, you were simply growing. They are mad not because you wronged them, but because your peace no longer depends on their presence. They are mad because your silence has become strength and your distance has become protection. God pulled you away not to isolate you, but to elevate you. When you stop calling, you stop feeding what was draining you. You stop watering the weeds that choked your joy. You stop giving attention to people who never gave you understanding. And that's when God begins to show you who really belonged. Sometimes it's not rejection, it's redirection. Sometimes the very call you didn't make was the call that saved your soul. Because when you stop reaching out to what hurts you, you start reaching up to God who healed you. There comes a time when God whispers, "Be still." Not because you're wrong, but because your voice is no longer needed in that conversation. You've explained yourself enough. You've apologized enough. You've tried to make peace with people who enjoy war. And God says, "Let me handle what your words could not fix." You see, when you stop calling, you're not being rude, you're being wise. You're obeying the quiet command of a God who removes you from chaos so He can refill you with peace. Do you know why they're angry? Because your peace threatens their control. Your silence exposes their motives. When you used to call, they felt powerful. When you used to chase, they felt needed. But when you stop, they realized it wasn't love, it was dependency. They were feeding off your kindness. And when you pull back, you cut off their supply. And now they have to face themselves without your energy to cover their emptiness. God is teaching you something powerful here. Not everyone who loses you deserves a second chance to find you. There is divine wisdom in distance. God sometimes separates you from certain people so that your spirit can breathe again. You cannot heal in the same place that broke you. You cannot grow in the same soil that refused to nurture your roots. God has to transplant you, move you, replant you in peace. That's why you stopped calling. That's why you walked away. Not because you lost love, but because you found clarity. God showed you that peace is not found in constant communication, but in divine connection. And when you obey that calling, people will misunderstand you. They'll say you've changed. They'll whisper that you're arrogant now. They'll gossip that you think you're better. But what they won't say is how much you cried in silence, how much you prayed for guidance, how many nights you begged God to give you peace before He gave you distance. They will talk about how exhausted your soul was from trying to fix what was never yours to repair. God separated you for sanctification. Sometimes He hides you to heal you. Sometimes he removes voices so you can finally hear his. And that's why the silence feels so heavy, because it's sacred. It's not loneliness, it's preparation. God is rewiring your spirit, teaching you to depend on him alone. When you stop calling people who don't value you, you're not losing them, you're losing noise. And when the noise is gone, you can finally hear the still small voice of God saying, "Now let me lead you." There's a reason peace feels so foreign when you first find it. You've been surrounded by chaos for so long that calmness feels uncomfortable. But God didn't call you to comfort. He called you to clarity. The same people who used to drain you will accuse you of being distant, but they don't realize you're not distant. You're delivered. You no longer need validation from people who couldn't handle your elevation. When God promotes you, your circle naturally gets smaller. That's not rejection, that's refinement. And yes, they're mad because you never called them again, but that's their revelation, not your responsibility. They are mad because your silence made them see the truth about themselves. When you were calling, you were covering their insecurity. When you were chasing, you were feeding their pride. But now, your absence has exposed what your presence once protected. That's divine strategy. God sometimes uses silence as a sword, not to wound others, but to cut you free from what kept you bound. Let them be mad. Let them misunderstand. Let them talk, because God sees your silence and he understands your heart. You didn't walk away in arrogance. You walked away in obedience. You didn't stop calling because you stopped caring. You stopped because you started healing. God heard conversations you didn't, saw intentions you couldn't, and decided it was time for you to detach from what couldn't go with you. You thought it was a loss, but it was a rescue. Your peace is not for negotiation. You cannot beg people to understand what God has commanded when he says enough. It's not a suggestion, it's a divine instruction.
Stop calling those who bring confusion. Stop reaching out to those who never reached in. God wants you to reserve your energy for what's ahead, not what's behind. Some people were never meant to stay. They were only meant to teach. Their purpose was temporary, but your destiny is eternal. There is a new version of you being born in silence. Every time you choose not to respond, you're choosing to rise. Every time you choose peace over proving your point, you're stepping closer to God's purpose. You are learning that validation from people is nothing compared to approval from God. And once you experience divine peace, you'll never chase human approval again. That's why they're mad, because they no longer control your emotions. You've handed your heart back to the one who created it. Your growth will offend those who benefited from your weakness. When God strengthens your spirit, your silence becomes a storm they can't handle. They call it pride, but God calls it preservation. They call it arrogance, but God calls it an anointing. You are not walking away. You're walking towards something higher. You are stepping out of familiar pain and into divine peace. And if they can't handle your peace, they were never ready for your purpose. So don't you dare feel guilty for your distance. God set that boundary, not your ego. And when God sets a boundary, it's for your protection. You can forgive them without reconnecting. You can love them from afar without reopening that wound. You can wish them well without walking back into the fire God already pulled you out of. That's not bitterness, that's wisdom. Because not everyone who claps for you is clean-hearted, and not everyone who misses you means you well. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. Let God defend what you refuse to explain. Let your peace speak louder than their gossip. Let your absence remind them that access to you was a privilege, not a right. When you live by peace, you stop chasing explanations and start trusting revelations. God will expose what needs to be seen in His own time. You don't need to explain yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. Your silence is not weakness. It's warfare done in wisdom. And one day, they'll remember how kind you were. They'll remember how patient you stayed. They'll remember how you loved them even when they took you for granted. And in that moment, they'll realize that the one they thought they could use was the one God had chosen. That's when God will prepare a table before you, not to humiliate anyone, but to demonstrate that His favor always follows obedience. You don't need to call them. God will handle the conversation they avoided. And when it's all said and done, you'll look back and realize that every unanswered call, every silent night, every moment of separation was part of God's protection plan. What you thought was rejection was really divine redirection. God was never punishing you. He was preparing you. You were not losing people.
You were losing distractions. Every time you didn't call back, every time you walked away quietly, you were saying, God, I trust you more than I trust my emotions. And that trust became the foundation of your peace. They're mad because you no longer serve their comfort. They're angry because your silence has power. But you've learned something sacred. You don't have to respond to every noise when you're walking with divine purpose. You don't have to explain your peace when God has already justified your path. You see, when you walk with God, He teaches you that sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's clarity. It's peace that comes from knowing you did your part, and the rest belongs to Him. Let them think what they want. Let them tell their version of the story. Let them whisper in corners where God is not present. Because while they're talking, God is transforming you. While they're trying to figure you out, God is lifting you up. And while they're still angry about a call you never made, God is preparing a future they will one day witness and not understand. Because what's coming next is peace that passes understanding. You don't owe explanations for obeying God's instructions. You don't have to justify your healing. When God tells you to let go completely. When He tells you to be silent, stay still. When He tells you to move on, move forward without turning back. There is power in stillness. There is wisdom in distance. There is protection in peace. You are not heartless. You are healed. You are not distant. You are directed. So walk in your peace. Guard your spirit. Keep your circle pure. And if they are still mad that you never called again, let them be. Because one day they'll understand that it was not pride. It was purpose. It was not ego. It was elevation. God took you away so He could take you higher. And when you finally stand in the place He's prepared for you, you'll thank Him for every door He closed, every person He removed, and every phone call you never made. Because sometimes the greatest act of faith is silence. Sometimes the loudest yes to God is the quiet no to everyone else. Keep walking, keep trusting, keep your peace. What's ahead of you is far greater than what's behind you. And when they see the glow of peace on your face, they'll finally understand you didn't stop calling because you stopped caring.